Hey, this is Grant Burgess, and this is the first week tutorial of making hip hop and downtempo music in Ableton Live. This coincides with the Mount Hood Community College class, but it is definitely useful for anyone who's brand new to Ableton and wants just the very kind of basic tutorials on how to build things basically like an MPC. So we'll jump right in. So if you're using a Mac and if you're using Ableton 9, all of this will pretty much look the exact same to you. If you're not, there may be some searching you're going to have to do, but it's all pretty much the same. So the first thing that I do if I get a new version of Ableton or if I get a new computer is I find all the samples that I want to use, all the drum samples, all the audio samples, anything that I might want to pull in. I put them into one folder. So you'll see over here in Finder, I have this Ableton class folder. If you just drag this down into here, so you'll see that little line shows up. Once it's in there, then you'll have everything that you need right there. Now that's not the case for Ableton 8, I believe. I think they have a different system of doing that, but it's still possible to have all of your sounds there in your browser off to the left here. If you can't see your browser, there's this little arrow up here in the upper left, and if that's pointing down, you won't be able to see it. So if you just click it, all those things should come up. So I have loaded, and if you are taking the class, you should have either on a flash drive or somehow on your machine this week 1 folder here, and it is basically just 3 hits: this hat, this kick, and this snare. First thing I want to work on is just a 1-bar drum break together and kind of just show you how the drum rack works. Because the drum rack is going to be in a lot of ways central to what we do, because it's kind of modeled after the MPC, and it links up with MIDI controllers very well, but it also links up with if you're using your typing keyboard to trigger samples, or if you're not using anything to trigger samples, if you're just writing them in, it's a pretty easy, pretty intuitive thing to use. So the first thing I do, once you have a folder over here, or even if you want to just pull it from your Finder window, or if you're on Windows, your Explorer window, that's fine too. Once I have all those samples ready to go, if you up here in categories, if you go to drums and you go to drum rack and you just pull one of these over, and we can actually get rid of these, and you do that by you can just press backspace when you highlight them. So now you just have the drum rack by itself. So down here you see it's set up just like an MPC with 16 pads, and it's really just drag and drop, very simple. So if you go back into your folder over here and you want to, let's start with just bringing in the hat. Now I'm going to arrange it the way that I usually arrange it. If you find that for whatever setup you have, you want to arrange it differently, that's totally fine. It won't look much different than what I'm doing here. So let's bring the hat in. I like to bring it over here on D. Now, if you're using a MIDI controller that has those 16 pads, if you tap it right now, it won't do anything. This button down here, if you'll see down there at the very bottom of this track, this is the arm button. It turns it on for recording. You're going to use that if you're recording MIDI, like this is MIDI right now, or if you're recording audio in, really anytime. That just makes the track active for inputs. So now that it's armed, if I hit the same pad, I'm getting some sound out of that. So I'll go ahead and arrange this the way that I generally arrange it. I put my snare there on C#1, and I put my kick here on, up on C. If that does happen to you, if you end up, off in these weird ones up here, if you can see over here, there is, it'll show you just how many pads you could potentially have. You just got to drag it back into the 1 and 2 range is pretty much what this is. So drag it back into there, and now you can bring it over and put it right there. So now you have your kick. So I like those, but first what I want to do is I want to get them sounding a little bit closer to what I want. So the simplest way for me to figure out how to do that is if you look over here, off to the left of the drum rack, there is a little show or hide chain list button. If you click that, it gives you this list of all the sounds that are going in. And there's a lot you can do with this, but all we're going to do with it now is we're going to adjust volumes. So you have your volumes here. You have your pans here, so you can send your tracks all the way left or all the way right or whatever you want to do. You can solo them. You can turn the track off. There's lots you can do. But right now we're just going to focus on volume. So if I look over here, this is my monitor. This is telling me how much volume is coming out of this. So the kick looks fine to me. The snare's got so much punch to it, I might bring it down just a little bit. So you can just drag it down. You can also type it in. If you click on it and you want this to be at -2, you just type in -2, hit enter, and that's a little quieter. Now the hat, I personally like hats to be generally very quiet unless there's something special about them. So if you drag this down, I'm going to drag this down to maybe right around -5 or so. If I can, yeah, there you go. So it sounds pretty good down there. Now I also want to bring in a second hat, and I'll show you why. So if we bring the second hat, put it right next to it on the D sharp, and make that even quieter than the hat before it. So you see this is the hat we have, and you see it lighting up over here. So this is the hat we have, and I want this one to be even quieter, like significantly. So we'll do -12. Let's go even quieter. Let's go down to -17. So that's going to give you some sort of a, you'll be able to double the hats up, but it's going to give you kind of a little bit more of a swing, a little bit more momentum in your beat. So to start, what we want to do is we want to kind of figure out what hip hop tempos are. Now that's a really broad, difficult thing to talk about because hip hop has, especially hip hop that's being made now, with a lot of those trap beats, hip hop is much slower. And the reason is that the cadence of the MCs has changed into triple time or into triplets, and so they're able to kind of rhyme in a. It makes sense with the beats, and it all kind of sits well. I'm talking about the kinds of hip hop that especially that you saw from the early '90s until now, and those things are generally between, I would say, 80, sometimes 75, 80 beats per minute, up to 100 beats per minute. Most of the stuff I like is usually around 85. So if you go up in the upper left corner here, you'll see it says 120 by default. If you click on it, and if we just type in 85, press enter, that's going to bring us up to 85 beats per minute. If all of that is kind of confusing to you, don't worry. You'll just pick that up as you go, and we'll play with it plenty as we're going through these. So if you can think of a tempo that you really want to use, you can tap it here. So if you just tap that, so that we're about 106 there, and then you can kind of hone that in however you want. So, but let's stay with 85. Okay, so we are at 85. Now, what I want to do is there are plenty of ways to actually actively play, these drum sounds. That's not what we want to do right now. Right now, we just want something really simple, just so that we can get kind of used to the layout of things. So, if you right-click on this first scene here and say Insert MIDI Clip, what it gives you is one bar, one measure of MIDI so that you can write things in. Once you click on it, it's going to give you these four things. This is your kick, your snare, and then both of your hats. And this is a place where you can write them in time. So, and it's divided up pretty simply. You'll see up here there's a 1, and then there's a 1.2, and 1.3, and a 1.4. Those correspond to the 4 counts in a measure. So with hip hop, I think one of the easiest things to do is let's go ahead and put a hi-hat, the louder of the 2 hi-hats, on every count. So you just have to double click kind of anywhere near there, and it'll just drop one in. So now if we press this play button up here, or if we press space, Actually, you have to press the play button on the MIDI clip itself before it will play. Then you'll be able to hear these four notes, and space will stop and play it from then on. So those are the 4 hi-hats. It's pretty simple. If you want to put the quiet hi-hats, this is something I like to do a lot, put the quiet hi-hats in in between each count, so kind of on these upbeats here. So one there, 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 and there. And now if you press space again, or play, you get so the next thing about hip hop, down tempo, like the sample based music in general, anything that uses break beats, you're usually going to have a snare on 3. And it doesn't look like 3 here because we're counting it slowly. So if you count these hi-hats as ones instead, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if that makes sense, so so just of these 4 counts, there's a snare on the 3rd count. You'll hear it more than be able to see it, so don't worry about that. So with the snare on 3, you have if you ever put something down and it's not where you want it, or you didn't want to put it there, you can always drag it to a different place, and it'll kind of snap to the next accurate note, or you can double click it and it will go away. Just in the same way that you write them in, you double click to create the notes, you double click to get rid of them. So if you double click here on the 1 with the kick drum, there's usually a kick right on the 1. Almost all the time in hip hop, you're going to have a kick right on the 1. Let's put a kick right on that one, and let's put a kick right on that one. So we have that sounds about right. And then this is where you just get to play around with it. The snares are pretty standard. There's lots of little tricks you can do here and there to fix it, but this is pretty standard. So the kick is where a lot of the flavor, a lot of the kind of the variation in hip hop drum beats comes from. So if we do a kick here, a lot of times you'll have one right here on this last count before the 1 again. So let's hear that. Yeah, so it's a little straighter. It doesn't have as much swing as I would like, but it's not too bad. So we'll leave it in there. Let's put another one. Let's listen to it. I'd like to put one right here. Let's see how that sounds. All right, let's put one right here. Bring it back to the first count. So now that you have those things, if you go over them over and over again, you'll be able to kind of play around with the different things that might, if you want to hear a different kind of sound or whatever. Like let's say you want these quiet hats, you want them to count late. So something like. So you can mess around with any of this to kind of see what sounds best. And what's nice about this is that you can experiment with so many things, and if it doesn't sound right to you, you can always just go back and change it to back the way it was. So the next thing that I want to cover really quickly is recording these drums. So rather than writing them in by double clicking, actually recording. Now, this is where there's going to be some difference between the way you do it and the way that I do it and the next person, because I run an old M-Audio trigger finger. It's my favorite, and I don't know why. I've always liked that. Some people have Akai MPDs. Some people are going to use their typing keyboard. And this button up here, if this is yellow, you can use your typing keyboard as a drum machine. So there's a lot of different things you can do. So I think the easiest way to get into it, so if you go down here, this is how you stop this clip. Any clip that's sitting in here, you can stop it with this button right here. So if we stop that button and we turn our metronome on here, so you see it up there, so the metronome is going to play that's giving us our tempo. If you feel that you are capable of kind of hand tapping those drums in, you're going to want to play along to that. There's this little drop down right here next to the metronome. There's a Countin, and the Countin basically says that when you hit record on something, whatever this number is the number of measures or bars that it's going to give you before it actually starts recording. If you press none and you hit record, it instantly starts. If you press 1 bar, it gives you 4 counts before it actually starts recording. It gives you, somewhat of a warning. I have it set to 1 bar here, so let's keep it on 1 bar. And I'm going to hit this record button. All of these will record. I'm going to hit this. It's going to give me 1 bar, and then I'm just going to play the loud hats, and they're going to sound just like these loud hats. Okay, so we have the louder hats. Turn the metronome on. Okay, so they're a little late, but they're not too bad. One of the things you can do is you can always right-click and hit quantize. Now, we're going to get into quantizing, I think, in more detail as the weeks go on, but what I'll do is I'll actually drag them in by hand and get them all lined up so that they all are just in time. So now you have... Okay. So now all you have are hats on this. I just turn my metronome off because these are going to play like a metronome for us. Okay. Now I want to record the upbeat hats in there as well. And the way to do that, in Live 8, I think there is a button around here that says over, like OVR or something like that. It's an overdub button. In Live 9, you just have this little circle. I believe they do the same thing. If you arm the circle, basically, so if this track is armed down here, and if this circle is going, any MIDI track that's playing is going to receive new notes as well. So if I turn this circle off and I just play the hi-hats, and I bring that snare in, it'll play it, but it won't record it. If I turn this on, it will both play it back to me so I can hear it and record it. So you see how they're a little off? They sound kind of good like that, so I think we'll leave them. I'll try and do those upbeat hats. Those are a little harder to do. Yeah, not quite as good. We'll do them by hand here. We'll move them where they need to be. There we go. That's what I meant to do. Okay. Now do the kick. Oops. Okay, I'm going to put that little extra kick right in here. See, now if you're doing that overdub and you go over into the next note, it'll erase it. So let's try. There we go. All right, so what you'll notice with this recording of the drums is that, you can see, if you zoom in, all you have to do is click, hold down, and drag down. You can see the hat and the snare aren't perfectly on. And, it's really easy to see that a lot of this isn't exactly where the lines say it should be. That's what adds a lot of the kind of the human feel to it. So you have to decide when you're making these beats if you want some of that human feel or not. And if you want to write them in like we did with this first one up here, and then you want to go back and add some human feel to it by creating some errors by hand, you can also do that. But at this stage, when you're just kind of trying to learn how everything works, you don't really need to worry too much about that. So one last note about the about this view here. This is called session view. We'll learn about timeline view, which is a whole different thing. It's not very complicated at all, but we're just here in session view for now. If you click on the play button of this first one, it'll play the first one we did. If you click on the play button of the second one, it'll play the second one. It's really simple stuff. So I think that's probably all that we'll get to today. I wanted to talk about layering drums. So next time what we'll do is this button down here that says I/O. It's your input output section. It's kind of attached to your chain list over here. If you turn that on, what it does is it shows the notes that are received, the notes that are played, and the chokes. And what this does is it allows, the chokes allow for notes to turn each other off. So if there's a long sample playing and you want it to turn off when another sample plays for something like hi-hats, or for when you're actually getting to musical samples, that's where you go with that. I don't really mess with the play button, but the receive button allows you to layer drums. So you can bring in different samples into here, and then you can have them all receive the same note. And so you can have a snare that sounds like this, and then you can have a snare that's really high, or maybe there's like a tambourine on it or something, and you can have them play by hitting the same MIDI controller note. We will get into that next time, but for now I think we're finished. Happy chopping, everyone.